Hi, everyone. This is Tracy Malone from NarcissistAbuseSupport.com. Welcome back to my channel and thank you for being here. Today, I have got a great guest. Liane Leedom is a professor of psychology and a psychologist herself. And we're going to have a great conversation about um, what skills people need to recover from narcissistic abuse. And we're going to tap into a study that she did that showed how normal therapists are not meeting the bar. They aren't equipped to teach and help victims the way she hopes that they would be. So let's go meet Liane, and I will see you on the other side. This is Tracy Malone from Narcissist Abuse Support. Let's go meet her. Welcome, Liane. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's so good to be with you.
I am so excited that you are here today because I want you to start off by talking to my audience about your research. Everything we're going to talk about here is based on the research that you found with the recovery that therapists weren't necessarily helping victims with. What can you share with us?
Right. Early on, so now we're going back to 2004, 2005, when Donna and I started working together. It was very apparent that therapists did not understand the impact of people with cluster B personality disorders on their family members. And back then, the word narcissist was not in the public domain at all.
Mhm.
And that was what led Donna to use the word sociopath. So just to kind of say, but people can write me if they want, and if they have questions about their particular family. All Anyone who is harming people is by definition a sociopath. That's kind of how we define that term.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Is it possible to be a narcissist and not hurt anyone? I don't know. I
Hasn't
haven't,
been proven yet.
haven't found one that, but I guess, if they're out there, I wouldn't know about them because I study people that have been hurt. Right. So first of all, that was our main problem, that therapists don't understand victimization and they don't understand personality disorders. And so we wondered, what can we do to try to shed some light on this problem? And there's a lot of research that says that the people who are in the best place to discuss their treatment, and it doesn't matter if it's medical treatment or psychological treatment, it's the people that need the treatment.
Mhm.
So we've reached out through the Love Fraud website to people who had been in therapy and asked them what was helpful to you and what was not helpful to you. And we also included in that survey symptom profiles of the perpetrator of the abuse. And we followed up questions that said, was this present and to what degree? We had those questions. You had a 0 if it wasn't present, a 1 if it was sometimes present, and a 2 if it was present all the time. We had that question, but then we followed it up with give an example.
Mhm.
And one thing I've learned over 20 years of talking to survivors is their examples are convincing.
Mhm.
They give the examples of gaslighting. They give the examples of emotional abuse. They give examples of psychological abuse. And it is very convincing. And I'm sure that you by now have the same experience, that I just have to listen to somebody for 5 minutes and I can complete their sentences.
Mhm.
Because that's the other thing about this experience, is that it's universal. And I think if more people knew that, it would help them. We recently had someone who was in one of our groups who said, this is so healing for me to know that my experience was the same as everyone else's. Not that I would have wanted other people to experience this, but the fact that this is a known thing is so healing for me. And this was a person who was trying to protect children and didn't understand the nature of their co-parent. And so for them, hearing that was big. So I'm very sure, 100% sure, that the survivors that were part of our research didn't make it up. And we asked about the therapy. And we had people that were in couples therapy, and we had people that were in individual therapy, and then we had people who were in both couples and individual therapy with the same person, which you're really not supposed to do. But that happened. The couples therapy, we have not been able to get this published. And you know, I'm going to be talking to Donna about what to do, because it's been long enough and we've tried. We may just publish it on the internet and not peer reviewed, because, you know, the establishment doesn't like what our findings were. Some example stories. There was actually a couple who was in couples therapy where the male, the husband, admitted that he had guns, and the woman said, you know, he's threatened me with these guns. He uses them to scare me. And the therapist actually said, well, you know, it's normal to have guns. You shouldn't be that worried about it. And so for everyone listening, before a couples therapist does couple therapy with you, they are supposed to screen both parties for intimate partner abuse. And they're supposed to do it both with a survey in writing and with an interview, and they're supposed to interview you separately. This is the ethical standards, not made by me. I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm not a couple therapist. They are not living up to their own standards. They're not screening for intimate partner abuse, and they're bringing people into counseling who should not be in counseling, because what happens is the perpetrator aligns themselves. It could be a man or a woman, so I'm going to use the themselves. The perpetrator often aligns themselves with the therapist, and that produces more victimization of the victimized partner. They become more afraid, they feel more alienated, and abuse is happening in the session. So the people that were most dissatisfied with their therapy were people who had a therapist who tried to do both couple and individual. They were like, their ratings of their therapists were in the toilet. Wow. And so we had, and so that was one group of therapists that did not do well. So you can stop me if I'm talking too much. Because that's what professors do. You know, you get us going and we talk.
Just keep going. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just tell you then a little bit about individual therapists who did not do well.
Okay, yeah. Give me some examples.
So unfortunately, therapists, in addition to not being trained in the cluster B personality disorders, they're not trained in human hierarchies. You know, humans naturally form hierarchies. And when you and I talked before this meeting, I explained to you that I'm an expert on the impact of social dominance on mental health. And therapists are not educated in this. They don't even know the social dominant system exists. And the horrible thing is that they don't know it exists in themselves. So when they go on in to meet a survivor, if they're poorly trained and they didn't get enough therapy themselves, they don't know themselves well enough, that meeting up with that survivor is threatening to them personally, because the idea that someone close to you could abuse you in this way is a very scary thing.
Mhm.
So it's only natural that a person hearing these stories would say, well, that would never happen to me, right? There must be something wrong with that person that this happened to them.
Mhm.
And that's just lack of training and lack of self-awareness. And this was coming out in the therapy. One of the survivors actually said that the therapist told her that she was asking for it, and that, she wanted the abuse and that she liked the abuser. And then the survivor said something like, and the implication was that someone that was like her would never have been treated this way.
Mhm.
So they set themselves up as a superior position to the client coming for help. So I want to tell your listeners that I'm also a professor of counseling. And when you go for counseling, that counselor should treat you like an equal. We're all equal human beings. And I might be an expert on mental health and maybe some other things, but you're an expert in your life.
Mhm.
And so we meet at that point where you're an expert in your life and I'm an expert in some things. We're going to share information and together we're going to move you forward. If
Mhm.
you're not treated that way, you should not go back.
Yeah. Yeah. That is such amazingly smart advice. But people are also intimidated when they go to therapy. And as I was thinking about this interview today, I reflected on a therapist that I had for 8 years. Through my divorce, he coupled counseled us, if you'd call it that. Then he saw me through the horrible next year or two, and then saw me for more years after, 8 years total. I saw this.
Wow.
I even paid him to work with my narcissistic mother. Never ever said anything about similarities and patterns. He was with me with the next jerk I was with, right? Oh, that's too bad. He just listened. He didn't give me anything. And then when that last narc had me arrested, someone said he's gaslighting you. Look that up, which led to narcissism. So I go back to the therapist and I said, someone said he might be a narcissist. What do you know about that? I didn't know much then. And he said, they like to look in the mirror. 8 years of me being abused and walked over by someone who didn't get it. Yes, he listened. Yes, he heard. But this is also what I see is this lack of awareness, like you're saying, and what the damage does is I was in a second relationship not knowing patterns, not seeing the similarities, because all he did was go, oh my God, this is what's happening, right? He didn't say there's this is that and never ask me more questions. So it was a waste, but that's what people experience, right? So I want to
Right.
know from you.
Could I just respond to what you just said?
Sure.
Because I just think this is so important.
Hmm.
Okay. So one of the things I've done, and there have been multiple research projects and so many survivors have been willing to share with me their stories, both as part of research, plus just talking as two people. It's very common for women. So I can say something about men, but let's just talk about women, heterosexual women, to have more than one narcissistic, psychopathic, whatever you want to call them, partners. And I believe, and this may not be true for all, but a sizable percentage of that, it's just that women have been selected for the past 200,000 years. or more. No, going way back, probably a million years, to be attracted to males who display social dominance.
Mm.
And so for women, that man's display of social dominance, however that manifests itself, that's as attractive as breasts and a rear end and maybe a certain waist kind size might be to a man.
Mm-hmm.
And we owe it, I think, to women to get them, to help them recognize their attraction
Mm-hmm.
to men who display dominance like this, because just like, so now I can talk about men, the men. So I asked, many men, what was it about the woman, the abusing woman, that was so attractive to you? Not all, but many of them said it was the best sex I ever had. And so that so it's kind of the same thing, but, gendered. In the midst of that sexual attraction and that sexual experience, it can be very hard to be objective and mindful.
Mm.
And so don't blame. So I'm not saying this to you, but I'm just saying to anyone listening, if you've had more than one, it's natural and normal. And you weren't looking to be victimized like some of these untrained therapists are saying. You were looking what Mother Nature has programmed you to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Just like men have been programmed to look at women's attractiveness, and it's very hard for them to overcome that.
Yeah.
And it's hard for women to overcome the attraction to that in men. In fact, I know this about myself, and it's so strong in me that if I'm talking to someone and I now know that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
even if I don't know the person and I don't know their history, I don't know them very well, if I've talked to them for a few minutes and I get that feeling of, it's somewhat like attraction, I find this person interesting, that's for me diagnostic.
Mm. Wow, interesting.
That I don't believe it in 100%, and certainly in a clinical situation, I follow it up by careful history and all that. But that feeling in me is very reliable, and I've had it my entire adult life.
Wow.
And even in my healing, it hasn't completely gone away.
Mm-hmm.
I still do not get disgusted
Right.
by people that are this way.
Yeah.
And some people are blessed. They have a feeling, they see somebody that's, narcissistic or psychopathic, and they feel disgusted. Well, if that's you, then good, because you probably wouldn't be a victim. But it was never me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just programming.
Yeah.
Some of it you can't undo. Even all that I know, it still hasn't been undone.
Yeah. And again, the key will be for survivors to learn how to heal and take care of their wounds so that the next level is not the same picture of the person that you've selected, right? Because if you've got this pattern, the only way to undo it, not only to know about narcissism, sociopath, psychopathy, it's not to know that, because knowing it is different, right? They always present in a different way. Narcissist 2 was not like Narcissist 1. And I liked that because I was like, I don't want what I had. And then that's why Narcissist 2 manifested himself to be different.
Right.
Of the cloak and the mask, right? So when you were thinking about the skills of recovery in specificness to what the therapists are not teaching them, where are the holes and the gaps that you saw? What were they being taught? Because I know for my clients, oh, that would have been a good boundary to have someone talk to you about, or, dealing with your shame and your guilt and your fear, because those things are controllable factors. If we have guilt, they can use it against us. If we have fear, they can use it against us. What kind of things did you see?
Well, this interest that I have in teaching skills goes back to my own experience in therapy. My own therapist was very good and very well trained, a Yale professor. And I remember early on in my recovery, I went in to see him, and he was being appropriate as a therapist and listening and being empathetic and not doing any victim blaming. But I just stopped and I looked at him and I said, this just isn't going to work. I need real world skills to help me recover from this. And he just wasn't able to give those to me because that wasn't the kind of therapist he was.
Right.
And so that was when I said, we have got to start teaching survivors these skills, because if you know the skills, so then I learned the skills and I could then use them and use them in therapy, and I could still benefit from the therapist that I had. But I was using the skills so that I could cope with my own distress.
So what kind of skills are you talking about? I know that we talked about Donna Anderson, but we said Donna a couple times, then we might have said Donna Anderson, a love fraud, but you have developed something to help people fill this hole that they weren't able to get. So what kind of things are they going to learn, and what kind of skills are in that?
Right. So first of all, the good news for everyone is that these skills that we teach in this webinar series are skills that everyone can benefit from. Everyone, not just
victims.
Yeah, and not just people that have psychological issues or clinical issues. And so once you learn them, you're going to be a resource to your children, mainly. I think a lot of people are wanting to be resources for their children. So the skills fall into 4 groups. They come from dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a branch of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And so the skills are, first and foremost, mindfulness. Mindfulness is about looking at the facts of a situation. And that's very hard to do when your mind is clouded from the emotions from abuse, and your mind is clouded from gaslighting. And so, but with mindfulness, I think over time, people can start to recognize the gaslighting. So mindfulness is the first skill, and it's the skill upon which all the other skills are based. And mindfulness means being aware of what's going on around you without judgment. And the reason why that's important is that victims or survivors want to judge their experience, or they're in the habit of judging their experience, and they're in the habit of judging themselves. So if we let go of the judgment of ourselves, then the fact that we could be being deceived just becomes a fact, and doesn't have to mean, oh, I'm a stupid person because I was deceived. So let it go. Let all those judgments go, and let's just look at the facts. You know, you found all these numbers on their cell phone, even though they said, oh, I don't know who those people were. Oh, they just call me randomly, right? So look at the facts. Let go of your judgment of yourself and your situation, and just look at the facts and try and learn to see it without the clouding of emotion. And in the mindfulness skills package, there's a skill we call wise mind. In fact, if people want to hear about wise mind, it's discussed there's a free video on the Love Fraud webinar series where we talk about wise mind. It's being in a place to really look at your situation with wisdom, and that wisdom is within every person. It's a matter of how do you access that wisdom. So mindfulness skills help people reliably access the wisdom that is within them. Then the number 2 skill is distress tolerance. And the reason why we need distress tolerance is because sometimes those emotions are a level 10 on a 1 to 10 scale. And when they're a level 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, A person can't think straight. They can't access the wisdom within themselves. And the worst thing, and you and I both have seen this, the worst thing is they do things that make their own troubles 1,000 times magnified. And so the distress tolerance skills are all about how to get through a crisis without making your situation worse.
Wow, that's a really good one. Everybody needs that. You're right.
Right. Right. I learned that early in my career, even before I knew anything about this. I had a patient who was this wonderful woman, mother of 4 children, and her husband was, with someone else, and was in the middle of leaving her and gaslighting her and emotionally abusing her. And it was her reactions to it that were making her situation worse, that she was drinking alcohol and then getting arrested, which she never did before this pain, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about her a lot. I kind of dedicate some of what I do to her because I wish I had known this then. That, I knew to say to her, the things you're doing are making your situation worse. How
Right.
can we stop? But I didn't have, these concrete skills to teach her that I have now. So that was 30 years ago. So distress tolerance is the next one. And distress tolerance includes radical acceptance. And that is a phrase that the author of DBT, Marsha Linehan, brought into our culture herself. She is the person responsible for that. And I recommend all your listeners to read her book, her autobiography, Building a Life Worth Living, because if you read it, you will see she does not explicitly say this, but you will see her mother and father were narcissists. And so we owe it to her narcissistic parents that she created this therapy, because this therapy was what led to her own personal healing and her own personal spiritual journey. And she details it in her book. So radical acceptance is about, this life isn't the life I want or wanted, but nonetheless, it is a fact. And before I can change my life and turn it into the life I want, I have to admit my reality right now, right this minute. And that's radical acceptance. I have to, radically accept, and so I say this in the webinar series too, that radically accepting these individuals, if they're your partner or family member, it means radically accepting that you're connected to someone who's unable to love.
Yeah.
Who wants to accept that? Who wants to accept that there are people who are unable to love? And I quote this, a friend of mine told me to watch this show. I normally don't watch these shows, but there's this show, Westworld or something like that. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's about these people who are robots, and they become sentient. Anyway, one of the robots who's sentient now looks at the human that I think they're in love with each other and says, there are those that walk among us and look like us and act like us, but they are not like us.
Yeah.
That's radical acceptance.
Yes. And I think one of the things when I talk about radical acceptance, which is part of healing, right? The misconception when people say that, when you say, we got to get into a radical accepting where you are, the situation and all of that, right? It doesn't mean you're accepting the abuse. I think that's where people are like, I can't do that. This is horrible. No one should abuse me. It's not that you're accepting the abuse. You're accepting the situation that this person is abusing you, and therefore you must get out, right? And you're accepting sometimes that you have no control over them wanting a divorce when you don't. You don't have a choice. This is just the factoids, right? but it does
Right.
not by any means mean accept the abuse, because that's what everyone thinks, because they really don't know about radical acceptance as much, and they just go, I'm not, why should I take abuse? And they take great offense to that if they're not educated on what it means. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I
Right.
know people will look at it and go, you want me to accept this abuse? It's not what we're saying. And so I just wanted to make sure nobody leaves us a nasty ass comment down below. Um,
Okay.
so let's
And
wrap
so
it up.
I can give you another clarification of that. Take it even a step further.
Okay.
What if your abuser is your daughter who's between 16 and say 35?
Mhm.
And that daughter is evidencing that they have an inability to love,
Mhm.
and they're abusive and manipulative, and they may have graduated from college and they may have been successful, but they're evidencing that they are unable to love and they are hugely abusive of you. You don't have to accept that your daughter will never be cured.
Mhm.
I'm not asking people that. In fact, if you were to ask me, I hold out hope for all people, but we have to accept right now, this is what we've got. This person's not able to love. And the implication is that if I invite this daughter and her boyfriend out to dinner, and the boyfriend says, oh, boy. And so I'll use me as an example, even though this isn't my life. The boyfriend says, oh, well, see, her mother's a doctor. She must be okay.
Mm.
I just contributed to the victimization of someone else.
Mm.
If I know my adult child is like that right now, I don't have to believe they're going to be like that when they're 50, but
Mhm.
they're like that right now enough to know that they do not belong in a relationship with someone that they can hurt.
Yeah.
They don't belong becoming a parent. And that's a very hard thing to accept. Right now, this person cannot, because,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you parents, I know you have the hardest job
Yeah. For
to
sure.
accept that this is what happened.
Yeah.
And there's a strong genetic component to this. And so it can happen, even if people were loving parents, or
Mhm.
often people are loving parents, and a child is like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I want to wrap this up by just telling us
Okay.
a little
Talk
bit
too
more
much.
about the course, and
Okay.
and then how people can get it. So we don't need to tell them everything. I want them to go to your site. We'll put a link below, but just give
Mm.
us a little bit more wrap up
Yes. The
about what
last
we're doing.
two skills are emotion regulation skills and interpersonal effectiveness skills.
Mhm.
So the interpersonal effectiveness skills are the best advice that we can give you about how to be effective when you have to interact with a cluster B disordered person.
Mhm.
Um, that doesn't mean that if you do what these skills tell you to do, that you're always going to be effective, because there are circumstances that will make even skillful behavior not effective.
Mhm.
For instance, if everybody around believes the abuser, then you may not be able to correct that.
Mhm.
But if you behave according to what the skills teach, you'll at least be able to be centered in your own satisfaction that you behaved skillfully and that you did the right thing, and that whatever is going to be said about you by anyone is going to be either incorrect, or they're going to say, yeah, you were skillful.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah.
I think this is going to help so many people. Tell me how people can find out about this webinar series that you've done.
So we made a few intro videos to each of the skills packages, and they're free. And there's, like I said, the first mindfulness video is free. They can watch those, and then they can register for the webinar series
Mhm.
um, through the website.
Lovefraud.com. Yeah.
And so also let me say that the cost of it is very reasonable. As you know, you and Donna Anderson and I personally am not getting paid anything for teaching this webinar series. And in fact, I've never accepted payment from any survivor because it's sort of my way of paying it forward or backward or whatever. But the money that people pay for the webinar goes to support the education of therapists and other survivors. And, you know, the websites have to survive somehow. And if you were to take this same kind of skills other places, it can be $3,000 or $4,000 to go through all of these skills in the way that they're offered here.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it's
well, I can't thank you enough. I know that many of my clients are going to need to get involved with this and take it. Your expertise is all over you. You are just radiating. I want to help survivors, and your great, massive brain has put this together. And I know it's going to help a lot of people, and we'll put a link below. How can anyone find you? Is there something that you have, like, or anything we can share?
Well, they can go on ResearchGate and get my articles that way. And also, I don't mind, people can email me.
Okay.
My email, you want to put it in a link, or do you want me to say?
I'll put it in the bottom.
Yeah, people email me all the time.
Okay.
It's not a problem. People can email me.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Sure. Thank you.
I hope you guys found that helpful. I love bringing brilliant guests on, and you can see she really knows her stuff. And the fact that she's a professor, I think she could have talked all day. She really is so smart, and we're blessed to have her. I hope that you found that helpful. All of the skills that she's talking about in this webinar series from Love Fraud, I'm going to put a link down below. I suggest that you take a look at it. If these are the things that you're struggling with, you don't have to struggle anymore. Just go and look at this series and see if it enlightens you and changes you, because that's what we need to do. We need to do something different to get a different result. So I hope that works for you. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. And again, this is Tracy Malone from Narcissist Abuse Support. Like and share this if you can, and I will see you again soon.